Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to Feed Your Brand Center of Influence. I'm Tracy Hazard, and I am bringing you another great podcast center of influence. Such an interesting story. I'm bringing you Veronica Dagher. She's an award-winning senior wealth management reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and she is the co-creator, host, and co-producer of the top-rated podcast in the Wall Street Journal, Secrets of Wealthy Women. It's one of the podcasts that I subscribe to and have subscribed to for some time. And we were both at the Exponent Women event, which I've mentioned before on my show. I've also written some articles on it for Inc. magazine, which we'll link in the blog post for this episode at feedyourbrand.co in case you're interested in that. And she was moderating a panel and I was on a panel, not on the same one. And then we bumped into each other in a very long line for the women's room because, well, when you have a conference with 200 women, the line for the ladies' room is long, which is so funny. And so normally when I go to business events, that's not the case. And so we were joking about that in line. And then it dawned on me that her name was on my list for Authority magazines for writing an article about. And so I reached out to her and said, hey, we bumped into each other in the line for the ladies' room, and I'd love to interview you on my show. So I wanted to raise that to you because it's an example of how just asking and making connections and going to events and doing those things can get someone really amazing on your show. So as I told you, she's been the co-creator and host of this podcast, Secrets of Wealthy Women, but she has been a reporter for Wall Street Journal for some time, and she has interviewed some of the most well-known women in the world, Ayesha Curry, Maria Sharapova, Rebecca Minkoff. She's also the author of the Wall Street Journal ebook, Resilience, How 20 Ambitious Women Used Obstacles to Fuel Their Success. And she co-produces and hosts videos for Wall Street Journal and Wall Street Journal's Snapchat channel. She's a regular guest on the Fox Business Network, Yahoo Finance, and other national media where she speaks about women, personal finance, markets, and the economy. And she is a frequent panel moderator, keynote, and MC across the U.S. She has an MBA from Fordham University and is a volunteer anti-human trafficking educator for Lifeway Network. So I am so pleased to bring you someone who has deep experience and has a very highly produced show so that you can contrast those independent podcasters who started out of their garages or their basements or wherever, maybe some of them in their cars that we've interviewed already, and sort of contrast that to this more highly produced show that's coming from the Wall Street Journal, but which she has such high input into. So I'm really excited to bring you Veronica Dagher. So Veronica, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm super excited to talk to, I'm going to say, a real broadcaster. Some of us just play one on iTunes, and others of us, like you, are very real and you have training. And it would be so nice to get some viewpoints from that. But I want to start a little bit at the beginning, which is, when did you decide that a podcast was the next step?
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me, Tracy. I first want to preface by saying I learned podcasting and video all on the job. Like, my background was actually business and finance. And so I am self-taught. I got some mentoring from within my company, but in general, I have learned very publicly on the job. I'm still very much learning. So I just want to make sure that people know that, because I think it's important to see that, like, hey, you can not have a background in the technical side of podcasting or being on air, and you can learn it. I think what's important is to understand your subject expertise. In my case, it's personal finance, women and money, and then have a passion for that. The rest of the stuff you can learn. And it's an iterative process, so you gradually learn the more you go. In terms of having a podcast, I thought it was a good opportunity for us here at the Journal about 2 years ago or so, going to a lot of events and conferences, all about women and just the rise of women in the workplace, the rise of women's wealth and entrepreneurship, all these efforts to end the pay gap. And I thought that this was a great opportunity for us to address some of those issues, along with talk about some of the career challenges women face. And so I went to one of the executive producers at the time and said, I think we should do a podcast about this. I think there's so many women out there who are looking for community, they're looking for inspiration, and they're looking for stories of resilience. and hearing stories from CEOs and celebrities and so many other women who have gone through difficult times yet gone on to great success, I think would be inspirational for people. I knew it would be inspirational for me, and it has been. And so that's how the Secrets of Wealthy Women podcast started.
That's how we met, actually. So you were on my list of people to have on the show, as well as write an article about. And then we bumped into each other because we were both speaking at the Exponent Women's Group, which was amazing. You were chairing a panel and I was on a panel. And so it was so funny to have bumped into you there. And I thought, this is a community that I want to be more a part of. And so I had already been listening to your show, but I see what you mean by community building. Because once I stepped into that group of all those women together, I realized what a network, what an amazing group that is.
Yeah, and they've done a great job at Exponent, Courtney and the rest of the team in terms of building that out and creating those communities. And you know what, I've noticed the shift. I mean, some of the shift I've only heard about anecdotally, but in terms of like women and their careers and sharing knowledge, from what I've heard from some of my more senior sources, people who've been in business a long time, perhaps a bit of a change. Like in the past, there would only be one or two women in the room and there might be some competition between them. But I think we're here, and I'm sure there's obviously still some of that going on. But in general, I think the mood, and I think this comes from a lot of the millennials too, is there's more spirit of collaboration. Let's help each other. Let's try to advance each other because we understand what's saying, a rising tide lifts all boats or something like that, right? Like,
that's right.
If we all, right? Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know, screw it. But yeah, like there's that spirit out there that it's good for all of us. And it's not just women, right? It's women helping men. This isn't just a gender thing. I think this is about advancing everyone's career.
I think that's where podcasting and the influence you've begun to have through that is changing things. So it was really interesting to me when I was listening through a couple of back episodes that I'd already heard before, but I wanted to refresh my memory before our call today. And I was listening to the one from Maria Bartiromo. And she tells an amazing story about how hard it was to be on the floor and do her job. And I've had that same experience in the factory floor in China. So it's such a different world. So I'm in product design and development and I'm in China and they're like, where's your children? Like, who's taking care of them? Like, that's things they would say to me. And you have these kind of differences go on, but it's the same experience. It's just a little bit different world. And I thought that's really what you're bringing is such interesting viewpoint to these people who we look at and these women that we look at that are so successful and wealthy and confident and they've got it all together, but they've all been through those struggles too that we're struggling with right now at whatever stage of business life we're in.
Absolutely. Maria is a great example of that in terms of the ground she broke for so many women in business and also women business journalists. I mean, I think we all have a pretty big debt to her in terms of what she had to endure to get where she is and sort of set the standard for a lot of female journalists. And you yourself, if you were on the factory floor in China and you were sort of being one of the first to do that, and you yourself are a model to other women, I'm sure there's other women around who either saw you or heard about you and feel inspired by the ground that you broke. And so I think each of us in our own way can change society. We may not realize we're doing it at the time, and it's a gradual process, but I think we all can inspire people in ways that we might not even recognize.
Oh, I agree. I think that's such an interesting thing about our podcasts here, right? They have ripples of effects and the work that we do. Mm-hmm. We don't even know that. So I want to talk a little bit about your show, though. Your show is structured really nicely. And so for a lot of podcasters out there, they're sort of free form and we just like, let's go. We'll just have a talk. We'll do an interview or I'll just speak. But yours is a lot more produced. Is that because of the involvement of the Wall Street Journal and the involvement of the team there?
Yeah, so I have a great producer. Her name is Tanya Bustos, that she helped us think about the structure of the show. And part of that, obviously, is the journal, a certain standard, but also because of some of the high-profile guests we're having on the show. We have people like Maria Bartiromo and Maria Sharapova and Bobby Brown and Gloria Steinem. And these women are incredibly, incredibly busy. They're generous with their time indeed, but they are so busy. So often when they're doing media, they are doing sort of back-to-back media appointments. And so we have to be super efficient in terms of our questioning, in terms of our process. We have sort of our setup. They come here, they take a photo or two. We have a photographer, Angela Owens, does some great photos for us. And then we give them the quick rundown of what to expect in terms of the structure of the show. I mean, most of them have already listened. and Tanya will have them do a quick intro for us, and then I'll go right into the questions. And they haven't had a chance to see those questions yet. They're doing those questions and answer cold, but I tell them this is your chance to inspire the audience. So even if sometimes you get a little uncomfortable, which isn't my goal, but my goal is to educate the audience, it's okay, because you will be so surprised at the incredible response you get from the listeners and how much you can change another woman's life by sharing your story candidly. And I have to say, like, my guests have been wonderful in terms of their generosity in sharing their story. So I book my own show. I'm out there. That's a huge hustle. Even though we're the Wall Street Journal, yeah, I have pitches, but a lot of the pitches aren't necessarily people I would select for the show. So to get those big names, I am out there hustling, going to events, asking for introductions, following up. Some of these biggest names take a year and a half to get on your show, and you might have multiple reschedules. And I'm managing the calendar. I'm managing making sure we have enough shows in the hopper that we've already produced, so we have a bank built up in case a guest cancels at the last minute. Out there marketing, doing interviews, and also, of course, I do all the research for my show. So I spend hours upon hours on each guest, like looking into their background, reading everything I can from all the way back into like the 70s. You know, we have an archive that we can check out, watching videos, reading their books, talking to people who know them. I try to do as much due diligence as I can on that guest, so I'm super prepared and want to ask them the questions that hopefully the listeners want to hear.
It comes across. It doesn't show. You hear it in your show because
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a definite depth to the questions that you ask. And there's a big difference in the preparation. When you hear a host do preparation like you do, it has a level of professionalism that can't be beat. And I think that goes hand in hand with the type of guests. They're expecting you to ask them something new, right? They don't want to say the same thing every time. So that goes hand in hand with that.
Yeah, and the audience wants to hear something new. And it's always my worst nightmare to like show up not prepared. Like I was always that way in school. I was like over prepared.
I agree. Yeah. You know what? So has always surprised me over the years of doing so many interviews for my column and for my podcast, though, how many guests don't listen to your show before they show up on it. It's just a sign of, I think, sometimes bad publicists who haven't prepared them well. And it's sloppy on your end. So when you get a guest who's obviously listened to your show, knows what to expect, and it's important to them, that's amazing. And it's so helpful, I think, at the end of the day, to be looking for those. So you're participating in that process at a deep level, and it's a lot of time commitment.
It is. It's a lot of time commitment for sure. You know, I think people think like, oh, you know, podcasting is fun and person. Yeah, it can be for sure. But the amount of time it takes between the pitching and the follow-up and the booking and the research and the actual recording part is often quick, right? If your technology and equipment goes well, that's where luckily Tanya helps us really, that's really her skill set in terms of making sure we have the best equipment and making sure the sound sounds great. I'm really privileged to have a producer on staff. She's an expert in that. She knows what sounds good and what doesn't sound good and what we need to do retakes on. And so having her as that advantage is huge. And then, then she'll publish the show for us. But we do follow-up promotion. We'll do a promotion story on WSJ.com, which also helps raise visibility of the podcast. And it gives us a place to embed the story in. They were just talking about, basically, it's an expo, as you know, of personal finance, people who write and blog and do podcasts all about personal finance. And they were just saying the importance of doing things like having a story to embed your video or your podcast in, because that just raises more visibility. And that also gives the guest, right, another thing to share. Like you want to make it as easy as possible for your guest to share those assets, for lack of a better word.
That's what we call here. We call it brand casting. In all fairness, it's named after my company, Brandcasters, but we call it brand casting because you're right. It's so critically important. It doesn't end at just the audio. You have to do so much more in the process to make sure people see it, they hear it, they find it. You want all of those things to happen. So how is this preparation? How is what you're doing different than what you do when you're doing one of your video shows or you're prepping for an article that you're going to write? I mean, what is different about the media?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the depth of research, and I always treat these like a story. Essentially, I'm doing almost a profile piece on that guest. But I think what's different is it's such a luxury to be able to speak with someone for 20, 30 minutes about their story, and for them to really get a chance to share that story and their point of view and perhaps clarify some misunderstandings been put out there about them in the past, or help them really articulate their views on money or career. It gives me a chance to challenge them on all of those views, their past statements. It's a really nice give and take that there's no way, I shouldn't say no way, most likely it's really difficult to get that much back and forth in something like a story or even a video, right? Because many of the videos today are like 90 seconds or 2 minutes if they're long. And in podcasting, you have such an opportunity to have such a nice back and forth, to have a conversation and to both sides get to elaborate. I mean, I try to listen a lot more than I speak. I know I differ from some posts on that. I know.
No, you do. It's actually noticeable. It's actually really noticeable. Yeah. And I thought, wow, she's really listening. She's really sitting back. She asks a question and she lets them go. And I loved that structure because so often that doesn't happen.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's intentional. And partly it's because I find other people a lot more interesting than I find myself to be. So I'd much rather hear their story. And I think, I kind of sometimes assume the audience, well, I always assume the audience feels the same way. Some of these people have incredible accomplishments, been all over the world, done so many things, but whether it's their charitable interest or their careers. So yeah, I really want to sit back and learn from them. I'm learning with the audience as much as hopefully the listener is.
What are some of those things that you've learned that you heard on your show and you thought, wow, that's an amazing tip, or that's an amazing thing? That's so interesting. I never knew that you've applied for yourself.
Oh gosh, there's so many things. I think one of the constant themes throughout the show and throughout the different guests, and I wrote an ebook based on the show too called Resilience, and we called it that because that was really the through line of all the podcasts so far. It kind of was an aha moment for me because you see these women who are famous or wealthy and beautiful and look great and successful and have these well-known businesses or other interests. And you think like, oh, they must have always had everything together. They must have always known what they wanted to do. They must have always had everything go their way and not have obstacles. But one of the things I learned is that no matter how wealthy or successful you are, there has been for I don't want to give a percentage, but probably a really high percentage of people, I don't know, 99% of people or something like that in my anecdotal study, but have had some pretty serious obstacles that they've had to overcome, whether it's in their personal life or in their professional life or their financial life. They've had to overcome those obstacles. And the women on my show that I asked to come on my show have indeed all faced those obstacles, no matter what their Instagram looks like. They have had these obstacles they've had to overcome. And the difference between them and women who are doing well, but maybe not as well, is that women tend to bounce back from their failures and their challenges quicker than other people. They learn not to take it so personally, even though it can feel very personal. They learn to just keep going despite those obstacles and despite all the naysayers.
Oh, that's resilience, such a good word. And I love that you wrote a book from your podcast about that. I still have mine for my column on the back shelf. I have not yet, because for me, we produce so many episodes here that I always feel like the book is old because podcasts seem so new, right?
Yeah, right. I know. It's kind of funny, but yeah, it was an ebook, which we're doing more of, which is exciting. But yeah, great, because there's all different audiences. Yes, it's similar content. The ebook had a more elaborated. We elaborated more on the stories, but it's neat because it hits different audiences, because some people who pick up a podcast may not pick up an ebook, and some people who pick up an ebook may not be on Snapchat or check out our video series on the Secrets podcast. It's really nice that we have the opportunity to franchise out and to explore so many different mediums.
I love that. One of the things I was thinking about, as you've done a lot of broadcasting, you've worked in a lot of different mediums. And thinking about that, is there any tips that you've translated from what you were doing before that has served you really well as a podcaster?
So I think one tip would be, and this is something I'm still working on, is try to be as conversational as you can. Try to be yourself. And I think everybody has to find what that means for them. But I know for the longest time, I really looked up to the work of Oprah Winfrey and Maria Bartiromo and Barbara Walters. And I was trying to actually physically sound like them. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I thought that, and they are, super talented, but I thought I had to physically sound like them or be like them or try to imitate some of the best writers in our newsroom, and Jason Zweig or Laura Saunders or some of these other superstars in our newsroom. And I think what I learned is you got to be yourself. You can talk to those people who've achieved great success, whether it's in writing or video or podcasting or TV, But I think ultimately you need to be yourself because it's just easier for you. It's more authentic. And then it just helps you feel more confident. I mean, I think that's what makes everyone so special is that they bring their own voice to their podcast. Nobody wants someone to mimic someone else. And so just being yourself is kind of the greatest gift you can give to the audience. And so that's something I learned from talking to some of the TV hosts and even some of the writers here, that you just want to find your own voice and you're not looking to mimic someone else's. So I think that's a tip that anyone can take away that I would consider.
I'm so glad you're not the Joe Rogan show. So, you have your own angle. It fits you and it fits the audience that's listening to you as well. Well, I want to tap into some of our 5 questions we ask everyone on the Center of Influence. And I'm so glad that you participate so strongly in the preparation of your show because you can answer these. So what are some of the best ways you found to book a great guest?
Oh, gosh. I think persistence is the number one tip. Like, who said this? One of the guests on my show. Oh, my gosh. Is it Katia? Yeah, I think it was Rebecca Minkoff, who's the designer. I think she said, except in the context of dating, no doesn't mean no. I'm not going to tell you who. But I had a guest whose agent, who I met, told me, no, she's absolutely not doing your show. She doesn't like the title, whatever. And I said, okay, well, the title says one thing, but there's a lot we talk about. It's not just a money show. I'm not going to ask her how much she makes. That's not what I do. And they're like, yeah, no. Lo and behold, she had something that she wanted to talk about a year and a half later, and not her agent, but someone else came to me and said, like, oh, would you like her to come on? I was like, yes, like she's huge. I absolutely would love her to come on. But because I had kept her on the radar, I'd kept an open mind, and then I kept in touch with that agent, even though he said no. And I have a sense that he passed that contact information on to her team. Also, being able to deal with the constant rescheduling. So having like a bank of shows is super helpful. And I did this to you, so I'm so sorry. I'm just like,
Yeah. We chuckle here because inside it, Veronica and I have had to reschedule on each other many times here. So it's taken us a little while to get ourselves scheduled. But you know what? It's worth it. And that's why I do it. And I know that I'm sure that's why you do as well.
Absolutely right. And it's not personal. It's just everyone is just moving so quickly. And so I think that's something to be flexible, be ready to deal with, and not think by any means anyone's above it. Like, we all have to deal with scheduling. And so just because you're the podcaster doesn't mean you're like, oh, I'm not scheduling. No, you'll probably, unless you have a big team, you'll probably be scheduling as well. And then also I stress having that bank of shows, because 4 months last year I had to take leave. My mom was sick and family leave to take care of her. And because we had a bank of shows already taped, that really helped us. I mean, we had to do a few recap episodes, which was also fine to do, but that helped me stress less during that time away.
Yeah, such good tips. So how about increasing listeners? What have you found has helped you do that?
I think thinking about the podcast as much as in sort of the franchise way. So whether it's thinking about like, okay, well, is there a video series we could build out from this? Is there an ebook we could build out from this? Snapchat, Instagram? Is there a way we can reach new listeners in different ways? I think that's a helpful thing. I think going on people's podcasts, like asking to be a guest or being asked to be a guest and accepting those offers is super helpful because you get to meet other podcasters that way. In addition, I like to have panel shows once in a while. So for example, for the new year, we did a money resolution show and I invited 5 women who are personal finance experts whom I admire, people like Jean Jatsky and Sharon Epperson and Farnoosh Torabi, Bobby Rebell. I had them come to our studio and sit with me, and we did a roundtable of personal finance resolutions and tips for the new year. And that was a really big hit and with listeners, and it exposed a bunch of new listeners to my podcast because those women were kind enough to share the podcast with their audience. And so, again, I think that goes back to this very communal spirit in this podcasting world, which I really like.
One of my favorite panels that you did was the one on confidence, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I love that. I feel like I learned so much from those women. It was amazing.
It was. Absolutely. So you obviously have a producer and you produce it in a professional way, but we didn't really talk about sort of post-production work. Your show has an interesting sound bites at the beginning from each of your guests. Do you choose those? How do you produce it in a professional way? How much input do you have in that?
My producer, Tanya, is really the genius behind that. So she said, like, oh, let's format it this way. And she selects those quick insights in the beginning. Yeah. And then we kind of go from there. And then I came up with the idea for the money secret at the end of the show, which is basically a personal finance tip everybody gives. So that's something that people can count on every time they listen. It's possible we tell people to allow 30 minutes. We may record 20 minutes. We may record 40 minutes. It really depends on how the conversation is going and what we're covering. But Tanya will ultimately decide what occurs in those, let's say, the 20, 23 minutes that is the final episode. Like, she has a very good editorial judgment on that final product. So that's really helpful. We'll discuss it, maybe ahead of time if we feel like, oh, there's something that really we want to absolutely keep in that's super key. But she has the final say on that. So it's a nice back and forth.
It sounds like you have a great producer you can trust, and that's probably the best thing for you in terms of doing it professionally.
So lucky, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you encourage engagement with that audience? You're sort of building a community here, but how are you engaging them?
Right. So I try to answer, I get messages on Instagram. I get a fair amount of messages on Instagram. I get a lot on LinkedIn, a lot of people, which is interesting. Well, I guess it's not entirely interesting because we are going for such a professional audience. A professional woman is really our target. And so if you think about professional women, LinkedIn is where they are. And so I'm getting a lot of traction on LinkedIn. I get comments. I reply back to the comments. I get a ton of private messages on LinkedIn, people asking me either for advice, saying thank you for the show, like connecting that way. A bit on Twitter, but like I said, it's mostly LinkedIn. And then I get a fair amount of email. And when I get emails, I try to respond to that. I would like to, and that's one of my goals for the show, I would like to find a way to bring the community, all these sort of devoted listeners, together in real life. I'm not sure what that looks like. I'm kind of figuring that out. And I think we're thinking
Well,
about that.
I think you should figure that out. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
So are you getting engagement, like, especially when you do the panel shows, are they helping with that engagement?
Yeah, they absolutely do. Yeah, they might ask questions to their followers and their followers might respond. Some of them are incredibly savvy on social media, so they'll boost engagement that way. Yes, I think some people are very switched on with that, and I absolutely love that. That's always helpful in terms of connecting the community and boosting engagement.
So now, for most of the podcasters are independent out there. They need to monetize their show. Do you have any ideas and any tips for them on how to monetize?
Oh, that's a really good question. Again, I'm pretty spoiled because we have a separate sales and marketing team that pitch people and think about that. I'm trying to think of in terms of tips. I went to FinCon recently, as I mentioned, and one of the tips I heard, because there was a lot of independent podcasters there talking, and one of the things they said, it was really helpful for them to have sort of a one sheet, essentially a sales sheet that breaks down their typical listener from what they understand, has a sense of maybe downloads, has a sense of what their target is, maybe a potential sell list or show list of upcoming episodes, so an advertiser might know what they're getting into. Just basically have like a little one sheet that you can give to advertisers at someplace like FinCon, or if you're pitching local advertisers, have something that it professionalizes what our market, like what you're talking on your show, that really, from what I understand, helps you be seen as a serious player. You're not just with a podcast. You're a person who's thinking about monetization. You're a person who's thinking about how your brand and their brand synergize.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. So obviously the show here is called Feed Your Brand Center of Influence. And you have now become such a center of influence with wealthy women and aspiring wealthy women. So in that, have you had anything interesting happen to you? Have you found that your influence is already having ripples? What's going on? And have you found that your show is bingeable in that process? And someone says, I've listened to all your shows and I took these tips and did something with it.
Yeah, I have. It's super cool. I mean, I have listeners like send me pictures, like collages they make from some kind of the notes they took on my show, which that's always super fun, or notes they took from the book. But one of the things that is really rewarding to me, two different things. One of them was a woman say, I've listened to a bunch of your shows and you have motivated me to become a financially independent woman and start taking steps to shore up my finances and get interested in things like, okay, how do I pay my bills and how do I think about my 401k? I mean, we don't go a huge dive into the personal finance. We'll sprinkle in tips here and there, but having a woman write to me and say like, okay, because of your show, I realize I need to take ownership for myself and also for my family. That is really meaningful to me. We have some women who share some super personal stories, obstacles that they've overcome. I've had several women talk about sexual assault, and unfortunately, this is something many women are still dealing with and coping with. And I've had women say, thank you for sharing these stories. I'm going to reach out, or I have reached out to therapists so I can talk about these issues and get healing in my own life. And when you hear stories like that, you feel like, wow, I feel like we're making a difference. I feel like we're connecting with people and letting people know that they're not alone, that there's other women out there who have been through what they've been through and they've lived to tell. They've come out on the other side.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that you're seeing the impact that you're having. So often there's many of us listeners behind the scenes, and until we accidentally bump into you outside a bathroom at an event, we don't get a chance to say, wow, I really love your show and you are having an impact. So
thank you.
So before we go, I just want to give you an opportunity to let us know if there's anything else that you have in terms of aspiring words, tips for other podcasters, people who are trying to get their voice out there. What else would you like to say to them?
I would say, great job doing what you're doing and just keep at it. There's going to be times that you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so much work. This is so tiring. But then you'll have these moments where a listener reaches out and says like, oh, you really helped me. You made me think about something in a different way. Or a guest will say, those are really good questions. No one's ever asked me that. These are like little rewards that keep you going and help you take it to the next level. And so there's always more guests to be had and more people to connect with. And so just keep at it and you will have those ups and downs. But as long as you focus on the positive and those results that you can get by helping other people and have that be your motivation, how can I help and empower someone? What motivates me, that motivation for good, I think that is what's going to carry you through the ebbs and flows.
Wonderful. Are you going to shift your show at all in the coming year? And you've done, you're getting close to 100 episodes. Do you have a special episode planned?
Oh, that's a really good question. Thank you for noticing. Yeah,
you should celebrate that.
Celebrate that. We totally should. I know. Yeah, that you gave me something to think about for sure.
Well, good. Well, I look forward to hearing what's going to happen then.
Awesome. Well, we'll credit you for that great idea.
So Veronica Dagher, Secrets of Wealthy Women, what day does it go live?
So we are publishing on Wednesdays now, and so you can go to WSJ.com to get this for free to get that episode on Wednesdays. Also, it drops on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, and your iHeartRadio, your favorite podcast providers.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being a center of influence to me as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Tracy. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the great work you're doing.
Well, I just had such a great time talking with Veronica Dagher. She's got an amazing show, Secrets of Wealthy Women. It is one of the shows that I subscribe to, and I have a hard time keeping up with all of the podcasts that I want to listen to. We have so many clients here, and it's hard to keep up, but hers is one that I don't miss. It's just got such powerful women and such great stories, and they're not the surface stories that you read about on social media. So I just really like to hear this in-depth view of how did they get where they are. And she has great variety, not just celebrities, but also business women in different industries. And I love to hear that because that started giving me new viewpoints, things that I didn't know, ways to do things that I would have never thought to become successful, to move yourself forward, to share in those secrets of wealthy women. So as Veronica said, it airs on Wednesdays. It's in the Wall Street Journal channel, so wallstreetjournal.com, and we'll have all links for that in the post at feedyourbrand.co. We'll also have all links to her social media and everything so you can get in touch with Veronica as well. So be sure to check out the show and be sure to take to heart some of her tips because I think she's got a really valuable viewpoint as a broadcaster before she came into podcasting. So if anyone has anyone else you think we should be interviewing for Center of Influence, I'd love to hear from you. Please send a message to us. You can do that via social media at Feed Your Brand, or you can do that via the website feedyourbrand.co. So thanks everyone for listening. This is Tracy Hazard on Feed Your Brand Center of Influence, and I'll be back next week with a new Center of Influence in podcasting.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.